On today's Technobabble, 4K and the codecs that go with it.
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Hey everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Technobabble. I, of course, am your host, Paul Clifford, and I'd love for you to join the conversation. Head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact, and you can find all my contact information there if you'd just like to leave a comment or have a question, snide remark, whatever you have, go right ahead and handle it over there. Or you could leave me a message on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Paul Allen Cliff, PaulAlanclif. We'll get you in touch with me over there. Now, before we get into the topic, I do want to talk about something that does pertain to it, and the first thing is streaming. When it comes to streaming, I use churchstreaming.tv, and churchstreaming.tv provides basically everything that I need to get my streaming working perfectly fine, and it's a flat rate fee. So while what kicked off this discussion was someone saying, hey, you could save bandwidth by changing to this codec, at churchstreaming.tv you really don't have to worry about that. So head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/churchstreaming and you can get a 1-month free trial of the whole shebang. iOS streaming, Android streaming, a Roku app, countdowns, maps, you name it, it's there for you at churchstreaming.tv. And believe it or not, streaming is not as difficult as you might be thinking. You might be thinking, well, that sounds like something for the bigger churches with like 10,000 people, and we've only got like 400. Well, believe it or not, you could probably do it. If you're watching this show, you're probably sophisticated enough that if you followed the tutorials and the step-by-step instruction that they have over there and talk to the support staff who are top-notch, then you'd be able to do it. This show is also brought to you by What Life Are You Waiting For? That's my pastor's book. Head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/whatlifebook to pre-order your copy today. The foreword is by Bill Hybels, and the book itself is by my pastor, Pete Heiss. This book is one that really, if you have a dream, if you have a calling that you've been kind of putting to the side, saying, well, maybe someday I'll do that, but not today, this is the book for you, because what life are you waiting for? Really. Remember, you only have one, so you can't be waiting for the next one, so you should do what God has called you to today. And that's basically the gist of this book, and some of the stuff behind it, some of the fuel that you should be running on, things like that. In fact, the chapter all about the fuel you should be running on it's one of the things that changed my life. So keep that in mind as you're pre-ordering this book. I get a little cut if you go through that link, or if you just want to search on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of the others, feel free to do that as well. Okay, without further ado, let's head into the topic. So one of the groups that I'm a part of, someone said, hey, if your church streams, you really ought to think about using H.265 instead of H.264, because it'll really cut down on your bandwidth bills. That's true. H.265 is a lot more efficient at delivering the same amount of video at the same quality than H.264 or a lot of other codecs. But I also pointed out that there's another one called VP9, and VP9 is backed by Google, and Google really wants it to be the de facto standard. And we're really early into this, so it could be that either one is going to go that way. But let's talk about all this and all that precipitated it. So if you go back in time, there was talk about HDTV for years and years before it showed up. And finally, when it showed up, the first televisions were like, there were 480p televisions, 480 lines progressive, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that, that were called enhanced definition. And there weren't a lot of those, but they did exist. And basically, they had the same resolution as the normal standard definition televisions, 480i, or 480 lines but interlaced, so lines 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc., and then lines 2, 4, 6, 8, etc. would be drawn. So you draw half the picture, skipping every other line, and then draw the other half of the picture. And in that time, that wasn't as good for sports and other fast-moving things. So that was less than ideal. Fast forward a few years, they got 720p televisions, which, if you do the math, that's about 50% more resolution. In fact, that's the television I have downstairs. I have a 720p television, and it looks good. Depending on the distance you are away from it, it can look really, really good at 720p. But then there was also 1080i. Now, 1080i had 1080 lines of vertical resolution, and the lines were drawn, again, like the 480i lines, every other one. Again, fine for slow-moving things for sports and action movies, not as high a quality as as 1080p, which is what people call full HD, which they're all over the place now and very common and not very expensive. So after that, you might remember that we dabbled in 3D TV, and the 3D TVs were iffy. They had several different technologies to make this 3D experience work, and first there were the active shutter glasses where one would cover up one eye and then uncover and cover up the other one. So you'd always be doing this, which is freaky. By the way, if you're listening to the audio, you didn't see what I was doing, but I was waving one hand in front of one eye and one hand in front of the other. If you're watching the video, of course you did see that, so that was redundant. Oops. So, that was one of the technologies. There were others. Right now at CES, which is going on as we speak, there's some talk of glasses-free 3D television. It's probably lenticular, meaning you remember those things you used to get in the Cracker Jack boxes where you'd hold it and then you move it one way and then it would change and you'd move it another way? That's lenticular, basically. The wavy plastic on the top allowed you to see one half of the image one way and the other half of the image the other way. Well, they'll probably have some sort of wavy plastic or something on it, and that's how it will work. That's the way the Nintendo 3DS works, and you can turn that up or down depending on how you like it. And for one person, it's not a bad experience, but as you move to either side, you would lose the 3D feel. So, I don't know, I'm a little skeptical. So after 3D, when that didn't take off, now we're starting to see 4K. Now the thing about 4K is if you get a 42-inch TV and you put it the same distance away from you that you've got your 1080p TV, you're not going to notice the difference. So that's a bit of an issue. But in situations like churches, hey, this is Technobabble, we're all about churches. So in situations like churches where you have larger screens, that will be helpful because people that are closer will see more detail. In fact, movie screens, some movies are shown at 2K, which is slightly better than 1080p. But if you really want to do a great job, movies are shot at 4K. So we'll have all the information for the first time, all the information from a movie on your television at home. Now, in order to see it, you'll need a much larger television or a large screen like you might have at church. So that's the advantage of 4K. Just like HD, focus is going to be really, 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 really important. And depending on the viewfinder you're looking at, it might be very difficult to get really good focus. So that's one of the downsides of shooting and creating 4K. Another downside is file size. File size is going to be huge. If you thought 1080p was big, wait until you see 4K. Gigs and gigs and gigs. Huge. And I think in some situations it'll actually be worth it. Which is what brings us to our talk about codecs. Now, if you'll remember, a few weeks ago we talked about codecs. And what codecs are they are the set of instructions that tells a computer how to compress, C-O, compress, and decompress, D-E-C, or compress, decompress, codec, compress, decompress the video. So H.264 is right now the web standard. Google wanted it to be VP8 or WebM, and neither of those caught on. Now H.265 and VP9 are vying for attention, and neither of them have enough traction where we'd say, okay, this is clearly the one that's going to win. So it could be that H.265 will win or VP9 will win. I think in the interim, we've got a bit of a format war. Hopefully this won't be as annoying as the HD DVD Blu-ray format war, but it is possible that if you're on Chrome, you'll be able to watch some streams. If you're on Safari, you'll be able to watch others, and the rest of the browsers will split back and forth between those two. So Chrome, owned by Google, is likely to support VP9, no problem. Safari, owned by Apple, is likely to support H.265 because they're part of the group that has developed H.264 and other things like that. So what's the difference between these two? Well, I found an article all about H.265 versus VP9, and it's an academic article, so it's really dense, but let me summarize. You will get much smaller file sizes with H.265. It's much easier on the processor to use VP9. So you see how that's a trade-off? There's a lot more math involved with H.265, but it gets you a smaller file size. But since there's a lot more math involved, that means your computer has to do a lot more crunching to make it work. So if you've got an older computer, it might not work. So you see where there's a problem. Now, if you've got an older computer, maybe this isn't as much of a problem because you're not going to be watching 4K on a display that only displays, say, 1920 by 1080, for example. But if you're trying to watch a 1080p movie that's compressed with H.264 and your computer has to really crunch it, it could be that even that slows down your computer and makes it difficult to watch. So that's the downside of H.265. VP9, on the other hand, less processor intensive but larger file sizes. So let me see if I can find the number. Okay. So H.265 saves 43% over VP9 file size wise. That's huge. So, and it saves 39% of H.264. So if you're looking at your video and it's 5 megabits a second, if you used H.265 instead of H.264, you'd be looking at 3 megabits a second. That's a decent savings. So I just want you to consider these things. Now, in 5 years, that won't be as big of a deal, but today it's a big deal because you'll need a pretty fast computer to encode and decode H.265. You'll need more file space and more bandwidth to watch VP9. So now, once this is all settled out and once all browsers have support for all things and all movie players and editors and all have support for all the codecs, once all that is sorted out, then in that case, it will be a situation where it's transparent to the user. The user will see beautiful video that is sent over the internet and they'll think, wow, it's great living in the future. Kind of the same thing that I think every time that I turn on Netflix or Amazon. Last night we were watching an old episode of, I say old, 2005 episode of Doctor Who from Amazon streaming, and I'm just thinking, how cool is it? I do not own this media. It does not live anywhere in my house. It's somewhere on a computer, somewhere out there. I don't even need to know where, and now I'm watching it on my TV. Very, very cool stuff, and I can pause it anytime I want. I can rewind anytime I want. It's just great. And that's the time and place we live in. And that's why streaming, streaming meaning Vimeo and YouTube type sites, are going to be more and more prevalent so that you can watch stuff anytime you want. And live streaming, like church streaming.tv or worship channels, which I've also used, and a couple others, they're all going to be more and more in demand in the future. And so I think you really need to keep an eye on this stuff and recognize that it's just going to be one of the tools that we use in our ongoing struggle to go out and change eternity. Till next time, I'm Paul Allen Clifford with TrinityDigitalMedia.com.